Have you ever sat next to someone you've known for years and felt like a stranger? Like there's a wall between you made of invisible glass? You see their face, you hear their voice, but something essential is missing. Something that should be there but isn't. Saint Teresa of Avila saw this, not once, many times. She saw it in the marriages around her in 16th century Spain. She saw it in friendships. She saw it in families. And what she witnessed changed how she understood the human heart forever. This isn't about people who hate each other. This is about people who share a bed, a table, a life, and still feel profoundly alone. Teresa called it the fated bond, the relationship that exists in form but not in substance, where two people occupy the same space but live in separate worlds, and she understood why. Teresa Maria de Cepeda y Ahumada was born on the 28th of March 1515 in Avila, Spain. Her father, Alonso Sanchez de Cepeda, was a successful wool merchant and one of the wealthiest men in the city. He bought himself a knighthood. Her paternal grandfather was a converso, a Jewish man forced to convert to Christianity, condemned by the Spanish Inquisition when Teresa's father was still a child for allegedly returning to Judaism. The family carried this shame quietly. Teresa's mother, Beatriz de Ahumada, died when Teresa was 14. The loss devastated her. She threw herself at the feet of a statue of the Virgin Mary and begged her to be her mother now. But inside, she felt hollow, empty, like something essential had been ripped out and could never be replaced. She was beautiful, vivacious. She loved novels, romance stories that painted passion in dramatic colors. She had friends who were not good influences. At 15 or 16, she developed a relationship with a young man that her father discovered. He was horrified, not just because it threatened her honor, but because he saw where it was heading, away from God, away from safety, into chaos. To protect her, he placed her in an Augustinian convent school. There she met nuns who seemed genuinely happy, content, at peace in a way she'd never been. This intrigued her, maybe even irritated her. How could they be happy locked away from the world? What did they know that she didn't? At 21, in November 1536, she entered the Carmelite monastery of the Incarnation. But not because she felt called, because she was afraid of hell, afraid of what would happen if she kept going the way she was going. It was a defensive move, not a surrender. And for years, maybe 20 years, she lived in that defensive posture. The convent was lax. It housed over 150 nuns. Too many. They entertained visitors constantly in the parlor. Conversations were about fashion, family politics, local gossip. Relationships were polite but empty, proper but cold. Nuns left the monastery frequently to visit relatives. They wore jewelry. They perfumed themselves. They played musical instruments for entertainment. The original Carmelite rule, which demanded poverty, solitude, and contemplation, had been watered down into something comfortable, something manageable, something that required nothing. Teresa herself admitted she spent nearly 20 years going through the motions, praying without really praying, talking to people without really connecting, smiling, performing, keeping everyone at a safe distance, including God. She later wrote that during this time she felt like a ghost, present but not really there, going through days that blurred into weeks, into years, without anything actually happening inside her. She was breathing but not alive, existing but not living. Then in 1554, at 39 years old, everything changed. She encountered a statue of the wounded Christ and broke. That moment launched her into a spiritual transformation that would last the rest of her life. She began experiencing visions, locutions, mystical encounters that revealed truths about the human soul she'd never imagined. And one of those truths was about relationships, about what happens when people live together but never truly meet. If you value documented spiritual history and mystical testimonies like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Teresa's own writings preserved in The Interior Castle, translated by Kieran Kavanagh and Otilio Rodriguez through the Classics of Western Spirituality series, and from the life of Teresa of Jesus, her autobiography, written between 1562 and 1565. Now back to the information. Teresa's answer to that woman in Toledo was not what she expected. Teresa didn't comfort her, didn't tell her it was normal, didn't say everyone feels that way. She told her the truth. She said, yes, something is wrong, but not with you. With how you're living? She explained that most people mistake proximity for intimacy. They think because they share space, they share life. They think because they sleep in the same bed, they're connected. But connection requires presence, and presence requires courage. She told the woman that her husband was probably just as lonely as she was, probably just as trapped, probably just as desperate for something real. But neither of them was willing to go first. Neither was willing to drop the mask and risk being rejected. So they maintained the performance, year after year, both dying inside, both pretending everything was fine, both secretly wondering if this was all there was. Teresa wrote in her response, preserved in fragments, that the fated bond happens when both people choose safety over truth. They choose the illusion of connection over the risk of real meeting. And that choice, made daily, kills their relationship slowly. So slowly, you don't notice until it's too late. Until you look up one day and realize you're living with a stranger, the woman wrote back. She was angry. She said Teresa didn't understand. She'd never been married, never had to navigate the complexities of sharing life with another person, never had to balance her own needs with someone else's demands. How could she judge? But 6 months later, the woman wrote again. This time her tone was different, softer, more honest. She said she'd thought about what Teresa said, and she realized Teresa was right. She'd been hiding, using her duties as an excuse, blaming her husband for the distance between them. But she'd been maintaining that distance just as carefully as he had. So she'd tried something. One night at dinner, instead of talking about the children or the estate, she told him something real. She told him she felt lonely, that she missed something she wasn't sure they'd ever had, that she wanted to know him, actually know him, not just live next to him. He'd looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language, uncomfortable, confused, maybe threatened. He'd changed the subject, retreated into safer territory, and she'd felt humiliated, exposed, like she'd done something shameful. But the next night, after the servants cleared the table and they were alone, he'd said something, just one sentence. He'd said he felt the same way. Then he'd left the room before she could respond. It wasn't much, but it was something. A crack in the wall. A hint that maybe, possibly, they could find their way to each other after 15 years of being strangers. The woman asked Teresa what to do next, how to navigate this terrifying new territory. Teresa wrote back with advice that became central to her teaching on relationships. She said, don't try to force it, don't demand, don't control. Just be present, keep being honest, keep offering yourself, and trust that if there's any life left in the bond, it will respond. But she also warned her, some bonds are too dead, some people are too afraid. Some masks are welded on so tight they can't come off without destroying the person underneath. If that's the case, all you can do is pray for them and accept the limits of what's possible. The woman's letters stopped after that. Teresa never knew what happened, whether they found each other or remained strangers, whether the crack in the wall widened into a door or sealed shut again, but she'd planted a seed, the seed of possibility. The idea that even after years of death, resurrection might still be possible. Teresa saw couples in 16th century Avila. This was Spain at its height. The empire stretched across continents. Gold flowed in from the Americas. The Inquisition enforced religious uniformity with terrifying efficiency. Kings and queens ruled with absolute power backed by the church. In this world, marriages were transactions. Families negotiated them like business deals. A daughter's worth was measured in dowry, in connections, in the land or titles she could bring. Love was not expected. Affection was a bonus if it happened, but it usually didn't. Marriages were arranged for honor, for wealth, for family alliances. Girls were married off at 14, 15, 16, often to men twice their age. Men they'd met once or twice in formal settings where everyone performed their best selves, where no one revealed anything real. Then these strangers were locked into lifelong bonds, expected to produce heirs, expected to maintain appearances, expected to play their roles without complaint. The man ruled, the woman obeyed. That was the deal. That was how society functioned. Teresa watched them in the parlor of the convent when they visited. Wealthy families bringing their daughters to talk to the holy women, or bringing their wives to seek prayers for fertility or healing or whatever problem they were having. She observed them in the streets during the brief times she was allowed out. She listened to confessions of their emptiness when women came seeking spiritual direction. She watched them in the parlor of the convent when they visited. She observed them in the streets. She listened to confessions of their emptiness. She wrote about it in her letters. In 1563, preserved in the Carmelite archives, one woman came to her, a married woman from a noble family in Toledo. Her name has been lost to history because Teresa never recorded it, only referring to her as a soul in distress. The woman had everything by society's standards. A husband from an old family, 3 children, all living, which was rare, a house in the city, servants, wealth, status, everything a woman of her time was supposed to want. But she told Teresa she felt like an intruder in her own home, like she was performing a role but never living it. She described sitting across from her husband at dinner, the table laden with food, servants moving silently around them, and feeling more alone than if she were locked in a cell in the deepest dungeon. She said they talked about the children, about the estate, about his business dealings with other merchants, about what needed to be done, what needed to be fixed, what needed to be managed. But they never talked about anything that mattered. They never revealed themselves. They maintained this polite distance, this careful formality, even after 15 years of marriage. At night, they shared a bed. He performed his duty. She submitted. It was mechanical, joyless. She felt used. He probably felt empty too, but would never admit it. Men didn't admit such things in 16th century Spain. They pretended everything was fine. They maintained their honor, their dignity, their mask. The woman told Teresa she sometimes looked at her husband and realized she didn't know him. Not really. She knew his preferences, his routines, his temper. But she didn't know what he feared or what he dreamed or what had wounded him or what made him who he was. After 15 years, he was still a stranger she was bound to for life. And she suspected he felt the same about her, that when he looked at her he saw a function, the mother of his children, the manager of his household, the keeper of his reputation, but not a person, not a soul, just a role. She asked Teresa if this was normal, if this was what marriage was supposed to be, if everyone felt this way but no one talked about it. She asked if something was wrong with her for wanting more, for feeling like she was dying inside this respectable, proper, successful life. Teresa understood immediately. She had felt the same way, not in marriage, but in relationships. In those early years at the monastery, surrounded by sisters, talking, laughing, sharing space, yet feeling utterly isolated inside her own soul, she realized what was missing: true presence, the kind of presence that requires you to actually be there, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, with your full attention and your real self. In The Interior Castle, written in 1577 when she was 62, Teresa described the soul as a diamond shaped like a castle with 7 rooms. Most people, she said, never get past the first room. They live their entire lives in the outer courtyard. They marry, they have children, they go through decades together, but they never enter each other's interior castle. They never meet the real person. She wrote that in the first mansion. The soul is distracted by vipers and reptiles, vermin crawling everywhere. These weren't literal creatures. They were the endless distractions people use to avoid looking inward: business affairs, pastimes, pleasures, status. She said people busy themselves with these things so they don't have time to feel the alienation and emptiness inside. And when two people live this way, both trapped in their own first mansion, surrounded by their own distractions, what they have isn't a marriage. It's a cohabitation of strangers. Teresa saw this pattern everywhere. Husband and wife sitting together, both lost in their own thoughts, both rehearsing grievances or fantasies or fears, both present in body but absent in spirit. She called it the death of the butterfly. The soul that should have transformed remains a worm. She described one vision in her spiritual testimonies, documented in 1571. She saw a married couple in prayer. They knelt side by side in church. But when she looked with spiritual eyes, she saw their souls. Both were turned away from each other. Both were reaching outward, grasping at shadows, at things that couldn't satisfy. Neither was reaching toward the other. Neither was reaching toward God. They were together, but utterly separate. This is what Teresa meant by the fated bond. Not hatred, not conflict. Something worse. Indifference dressed up as companionship. She wrote, in The Way of Perfection, composed between 1562 and 1566, that detachment is essential for true relationship. This confuses people. They think detachment means coldness. But Teresa meant the opposite. She meant letting go of your selfish agenda so you can actually see the person in front of you. She explained it this way: when you're attached to your own comfort, your own pleasure, your own need to be right, you can't love anyone. You can only use them. You interact with a version of them that exists in your head, the version that serves your purposes. But you never meet the real person. This happens in marriages all the time. One person wants safety, the other wants validation. Both are so focused on getting their needs met that they never stop to ask who the other person actually is. Years pass, decades. They share a bed, they share meals, they share silence, but they never share themselves. Teresa saw that the only way to break this pattern is through what she called the prayer of recollection. This is the practice of gathering yourself, pulling your attention away from the 1,000 distractions and bringing it fully present, to God first, then to others. She said, when you learn to be present with God, you learn to be present with people. When you stop performing and start actually being, relationships transform. The faded bond begins to glow again, not because anything external changed, because you changed. You stopped living in your head and started living in reality. In chapter 7 of the 6th mansion of the interior castle, Teresa wrote about spiritual betrothal. This is when the soul becomes so united with God that it begins to see others as God sees them, not as objects, not as roles, as souls, as irreplaceable, unrepeatable mysteries. She said, once you experience this, you can't fake relationships anymore. You can't go through the motions. You're either truly present or you're not. And when you're not, you feel it. A gnawing sense of having betrayed something sacred. Teresa knew many married people who felt this way, trapped in relationships that had become hollow, going through routines that once meant something but now felt like empty rituals. She didn't judge them. She understood. She had lived in that hollowness herself before her conversion, but she also knew something they didn't. She knew it was possible to resurrect a dead relationship, not by trying harder, not by communicating better or going on more dates or reading marriage books, by dying, by letting the false self die so the true self could emerge. She used the metaphor of the silkworm in the fifth mansion. The soul must spin a cocoon and let the worm die so the butterfly can be born. In relationships, this means letting your ego die, your need to control, your need to be right, your need to be comfortable. When that dies, real connection becomes possible. Teresa corresponded with a woman named Doña Luisa de la Cerda in the 1560s. Doña Luisa had recently lost her husband and was devastated, but as Teresa counseled her through letters, she began to reveal something surprising. Doña Luisa admitted she had never really known her husband. They had been married for decades, but she had spent those decades managing him, organizing him, worrying about him, never actually meeting him. Now he was gone, and she realized she had missed her chance. She had lived with a stranger and called it marriage. Teresa wrote back with stunning directness. She said it wasn't too late. She could still meet him, not physically, but spiritually, by praying for his soul, by finally seeing him as he really was, not as she had needed him to be, by releasing her grip on the past and letting love be what it actually is, a gift, not a possession. This is the heart of what Teresa saw. People treat relationships like property. My husband, my wife, my friend, as if another person could belong to you, as if you could own a soul. She said this is the root of the fated bond. When you try to possess someone, you kill the relationship. You reduce a living mystery to a function. You turn a person into a thing, and then you wonder why you feel alone. In Teresa's spiritual marriage, which she experienced at age 57 in November of 1572, she described a union so complete that separation became impossible, not because anyone was forcing it, because both parties were fully present, fully themselves, fully given. She compared it to rain falling into a river. You can't separate the waters anymore. They're one. This is what human relationships are supposed to mirror, not possession, union. Two people so fully present to each other that they stop being separate while remaining distinct, like two candles whose flames merge into one light. But Teresa was realistic. She knew most people never get there. Most marriages remain in the first or second mansion, surface level, functional, safe, but not alive. She wrote in 1568 to a friend that she had observed something disturbing. Many people prefer the fated bond to real intimacy, because real intimacy requires vulnerability. It requires dropping your mask, admitting your need, exposing your wounds. And that's terrifying, so people settle. They build lives together that look good from the outside. They maintain appearances. They fulfill obligations. But inside, they're alone, both of them, living parallel lives that never quite touch. Teresa called this living like the dead. She said these people walk around, go through their days, accomplish things, but their souls are dormant. They're not fully alive. And when two dormant souls try to connect, nothing happens. It's like striking two wet matches together. No spark, just the memory of what fire used to feel like. In her testimony number 58, written in 1576, Teresa described a vision of souls in marriage. She saw them as two people standing in fog. They could sense each other. They could reach out, but the fog was so thick they could never quite make contact. They spent their lives reaching through the fog, never meeting. The fog was made of fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of being seen for who you really are. So they kept the fog between them. They told themselves it was safer this way, but safety cost them everything. It cost them connection. It cost them life. Teresa's solution was radical. She said you have to walk through the fog. You have to risk being seen. You have to offer your real self, not the version you think will be acceptable. And you have to do it without demanding anything in return. This is what she meant by detachment, not coldness, generosity, offering yourself freely, meeting the other person where they are, not where you wish they were. This breaks the pattern of the fated bond. She wrote to her brother Lorenzo in 1561 when he was struggling in his marriage. She told him to stop trying to change his wife, stop trying to fix her, stop trying to make her into someone she's not. Just see her, actually look at her, notice what she's carrying, notice her fears, her hopes, her wounds, and be present to that. Lorenzo wrote back that it was the hardest thing he'd ever done, because when you really see someone, you can't hide anymore either. You can't play games, you can't maintain your superior position. You have to meet them as an equal, soul to soul. But he said when he finally did it, something shifted. The fog began to clear, not all at once, but gradually. After 20 years of living like strangers, they began to recognize each other. They began to remember why they had chosen each other in the first place. This is the power of presence. It doesn't fix everything, but it makes relationship possible. Real relationship, the kind where both people are actually there. Teresa saw that most people go through life asleep. They're not conscious, they're not awake. They're reacting, defending, performing. but they're not present. And when two sleepwalkers try to dance together, they just stumble around, stepping on each other's feet, wondering why it's so difficult. In the seventh mansion, the final stage of the interior castle, Teresa described what happens when someone wakes up. They become capable of true union, not just with God, with everyone. Because they've stopped living from their ego, they've found their center. And from that center, they can actually meet another person. She said, this is what marriage was always meant to be. Two people awake, two people present, two people giving themselves freely and completely. Not because they have to, because they want to. Because they've discovered that giving yourself is the only way to find yourself. But without this awakening, marriage becomes a prison. Two egos locked together, each demanding from the other what only God can give. Each feeling cheated, each feeling alone, each feeling like an intruder in a space that should feel like home. Teresa knew this from watching it happen. She saw it in the parlor of her monastery. She saw it in the streets of Avila. She saw it in letters from friends who confessed their secret loneliness. She saw it in her own heart before her conversion, when she spent years going through motions, relating to God and people with the same hollow politeness. And she saw what happened when people finally woke up. The fated bonds didn't always survive. Sometimes the discovery of your real self meant discovering you'd chosen wrong. Sometimes awakening meant realizing you'd built your life on a lie. But sometimes, rarely, beautifully, it meant rediscovering the person you'd forgotten, seeing them again for the first time, meeting them again, not as a role or a function, but as a soul. And that meeting, Teresa said, was worth everything. In 1579, Teresa received a letter from a woman she'd counseled years before. The woman wrote that she'd followed Teresa's advice. She had stopped performing. She had stopped managing. She had simply been present. And slowly, impossibly, her husband had begun to meet her. After 15 years of living like strangers, they had become friends. The woman asked how this was possible. Teresa wrote back with one sentence, "When you stop pretending, others can stop too." This is the secret Teresa discovered. Authenticity is contagious. When one person in a relationship risks being real, it creates space for the other to do the same. Not always. Some people are too afraid. Some people will punish you for it. But sometimes someone will accept the invitation. And when they do, the fated bond ignites. Teresa saw this pattern in spiritual communities too. Convents where nuns had lived together for decades without really knowing each other. Everyone performing holiness, everyone hiding their struggles, everyone alone together. She founded 17 Reformed monasteries between 1562 and 1582 because she wanted to create spaces where people could be real, where the masks could come off, where relationship could actually happen. She insisted on small communities, only 13 nuns in each house at first. Later, she allowed 21, but never more. Because she knew that in large groups people hide. They fade into roles. They become functions. But in small communities, there's nowhere to hide. You have to show up. You have to be present. You have to deal with yourself. And you have to deal with others. Not as ideas, as people, with all their annoying habits and frustrating quirks and disappointing limitations. You can't idealize them. You can't ignore them. You have to love them or hate them or figure out how to forgive them. But you can't be indifferent. The fated bond is not an option. Teresa's writings from the Book of Foundations, completed in 1582, describe how difficult this was. Women who entered expecting peace and finding conflict. Women who thought they'd escape the world's messiness and discovering it followed them inside. Women who realized you can't run from relationship. You can only learn to do it better. But those who stayed, who did the work, discovered something astonishing. They became capable of real love. Not the romantic fantasy, not the sentimental version. Real love. The kind that sees you completely and chooses you anyway. The kind that doesn't fade because it was never based on illusion. Teresa said this kind of love is only possible through death. The death of ego. The death of control. The death of all your strategies for protecting yourself. And most people aren't willing to die, so they settle for the fated bond. She was never more direct about this than in her letter to Maria de San Jose in 1576. Maria had complained that her community felt cold, that relationships felt forced. Teresa wrote back ruthlessly. She said, "You want warmth without vulnerability. You want intimacy without risk. You want the butterfly without letting the worm die. It doesn't work that way." Maria wrote back angry. But a year later, she wrote again. She said Teresa was right. She had been holding back, protecting herself, waiting for others to go first, and that waiting had created the very coldness she was complaining about. So she stopped waiting. She went first. She admitted her fears. She confessed her jealousy. She revealed her loneliness. And slowly, like ice thawing, the community began to warm. Others started taking the same risk. The masks started coming off. Real relationship became possible. This is what Teresa saw again and again. The fated bond is always a choice. Not always a conscious one, but a choice nonetheless. the choice to protect yourself instead of giving yourself, the choice to perform instead of being present, the choice to stay safe instead of being real. And the tragic thing, Teresa observed, is that this choice doesn't actually keep you safe. It just keeps you alone. You build walls to protect yourself and end up in a prison. You keep others at a distance to avoid pain and end up in permanent pain. The pain of isolation, the pain of knowing you're living half a life. In her final years, traveling across Spain to visit her foundations, Teresa saw marriages that had lasted 40, 50 years. She saw couples who had weathered everything together: poverty, loss, illness, death of children, every external challenge imaginable. But when she looked at them with spiritual eyes, she saw many of them were still strangers. All those years together, and they'd never met. They'd survived together. They'd endured together. But they'd never actually known each other. This broke her heart, because she knew it didn't have to be that way. She knew transformation was possible at any moment. She knew relationship could resurrect even after decades of death. But it required what most people weren't willing to give: total honesty, complete vulnerability, the courage to be seen. Teresa died on October 4th, 1582, at age 67. Her final words, recorded by the sisters with her, were about presence. She said the greatest gift you can give another person is your attention. Not advice, not solutions, not fixes. Just your full, undivided attention. Because when someone feels truly seen, they come alive. The part of them that's been hiding, performing, pretending, can finally rest. They can stop managing their image and simply be. And in that moment, relationship becomes possible. Real relationship, the kind that doesn't fade. In a document discovered at the Carmelite Archives in Seville in 1947, Teresa left notes for a letter she never finished. She was writing to a young couple preparing for marriage. The letter breaks off mid-sentence, but what remains is striking. She wrote that marriage is not about finding the right person, it's about being the right person. Being awake, being present, being willing to meet another soul without your armor on. She said, if you can't do that, don't marry. You'll just create another hollow bond, another relationship that looks alive from the outside but is dead inside. And she wrote this: the loneliest place in the world is next to someone you love who doesn't see you, who looks at you but doesn't recognize you, who shares your bed but doesn't share your soul. That loneliness is worse than being alone, because it carries the weight of broken promise. The promise that two could become one. Teresa saw that promise broken everywhere she looked. In Avila's streets, in her monastery's parlor, in letters from spiritual children across Spain, people who had committed to each other, bound themselves to each other, and then slowly, imperceptibly faded from each other, until what remained was a shell, a form without substance, a bond that had lost its life. But she also saw the promise kept, rare, difficult, requiring constant death and resurrection, but possible. She saw couples who woke up, who chose presence over performance, who risked being seen, and in those rare cases, she saw something that looked like heaven on earth. Two souls so united they reflected the union she experienced with God in spiritual marriage. This was her message. The fated bond is not inevitable, it's a choice. Stop choosing it, stop hiding, stop performing. Stop protecting yourself at the cost of connection. Risk being seen, risk being rejected, risk everything, because the alternative is worse than any risk. The alternative is spending your life next to someone and never meeting them, never knowing them, never being known. Just two strangers playing house, waiting for something that will never come if you don't create it. Teresa knew most people wouldn't listen. Most would continue choosing safety over life, choosing the fated bond over real intimacy. She knew this because she'd spent 20 years doing the same thing. 20 years of going through the motions, 20 years of being present in body but absent in spirit. But at 39, she woke up, and everything changed. Not externally, internally. She stopped performing and started being. And that shift rippled out into every relationship she had, with God, with her sisters, with everyone she encountered. The final entry in her spiritual testimonies, dated May 1582, 5 months before her death, contains one sentence about marriage, one line. It says this: two people fully present to each other is rarer than any miracle and more powerful. That's what she saw, that's what she knew. The fated bond is the norm, but it doesn't have to be. Presence is possible. Real meeting is possible. Union that doesn't destroy individuality but enhances it is possible, but only if both people are willing to die, to let go of control, to risk being seen, to give themselves completely. Most won't. Most choose the safe death of the fated bond over the dangerous life of real intimacy. But for those who do, for those who risk everything, Teresa promised something astonishing. Not happiness, not ease, but life. Real life. The kind that makes you wish you'd started sooner, the kind that makes you wonder how you survived so long on so little, the kind that transforms everything without changing anything external. Just two people, finally meeting. After years of living like strangers, finally present, finally awake, finally home.